Were you drunk?
Maybe a little bit. I'm not sure.
I think we were drunk.
You say that night you interviewed two people, correct?
Yes.
And one of those was Enrico Feola.
Yes.
I was not really drinking much. I was more so the sober guy that was kind of mediating, looking after his friends.
You could tell people are slurring their words. Their eyes are a little glossy.
I only had one beer that night.
Were you drinking beer?
I had one or two.
You yourself only had one or two?
Yes,
You sure about that?
I'm positive.
You had 2 beers?
Yeah.
2 Bud Lights.
So you had about 2 beers maybe?
Yeah, I had a couple drinks.
3 beers. Busch Light.
How many beers did you have?
5 to 7.
I had a few beers.
You had a few beers? I did. When you spoke to the witnesses there, did you have any indication that alcohol may have been present?
Yes. So there was a bottle. I believe it was a bottle of whiskey, if memory serves, in the yard. Also, upon speaking with a lot of the juveniles, it appeared they were drinking. I didn't feel sobriety anybody, but I was more concentrated on the stabbing, but it appeared they were drinking.
Do you recall any evidence of a large amount of drinking going on?
People's actions, the way they were talking to me, that was probably my biggest indicator.
And what were those actions that indicated that to
You
you?
could tell people are slurring their words. Their eyes are a little glossy. Just my training experience, I could tell someone's been drinking, especially a juvenile. But that would be my biggest. Like I said, I wasn't hunting for the underage drinking at that point because I had so much going on with the witnesses and the stabbing.
You say that night you interviewed two people, correct?
Yes.
And one of those was Enrico Feola.
Yes.
And the other one, who was that again?
Mackenzie Trafecante.
Any indication that these yelling, screaming folks had been drinking?
I did not witness any alcohol, so I can't comment on that.
We were just hanging out, had a drink or two. It was really just kind of sitting around hanging out.
And when you said you had a drink or two, what kind of things were you drinking?
Beers.
Beers. You said you had two beers?
Yeah.
What kind of things were going on when you got to Tyler Rich's house?
A couple people had drinks.
Did you drink?
Not while I was at the Rich's, no.
You didn't drink at all at Tyler Rich's house?
Could have had a beer.
Have you ever been intoxicated?
Yeah.
On May 14th of 2022, were you intoxicated?
No.
You told us that once you got to Ritzig's house, you had a drink, maybe 2 beers, maybe 3, maybe 4.
No, because I didn't have that many. I wasn't able to get anything for that night, really. So I didn't have much. So I was just kind of.
Well, you were there with Ryan Heinz, correct?
Yes.
And he had a 12-pack of beer. You didn't have any of those beers.
No, I don't believe he gave me any.
Is it possible?
I don't think so.
Possible?
Because when we showed up to the lifers, he had.
So your recollection is that it was 2 beers that you had at Ritzig's house.
Mhm.
Nothing else to drink there.
No.
Ryan didn't share any of his beers with you.
No.
You went over to the Lifer's house, correct? When you arrived there, you knew that your friend, Mr. Lifer, was drunk to the point of being ill, correct?
I had found that out from them when I had arrived.
Because you didn't see him because he was in the back throwing up, correct?
I didn't see him because I wasn't allowed into the property by the defendant and his friends.
Did you have anything to drink that night?
Yeah,
Were you drunk?
maybe a little bit. I'm not sure.
What kind of things were going on at the party?
There was drinking.
There was?
Yeah.
Now, when you say there was drinking, what kind of drinking was going on?
I just know people were drinking like casually, nothing too crazy.
Had you been drinking?
Yes.
How many alcoholic beverages had you consumed?
I don't remember.
Once I got back to my brother's house, I had a couple drinks.
And what kind of drinks were you having?
I do not recall exactly, but seltzers.
Were you drinking when you got to Tyler Rich's house?
No,
And you can't tell us exactly how many of those seltzers you'd had.
not more than a few.
Not more than a few?
Yep.
What is a few?
2 to 3.
We were just hanging out in the basement, having normal conversations, maybe drinking a few beers.
And that night, were you drinking beer?
I had one or two.
When you had these 30 people at the house, were people drinking at your house?
Yeah, a little bit.
What kind of things were people drinking?
There was just some beer there. Maybe some of the girls had some seltzers. Nothing crazy. It wasn't an open keg, open cooler party as it was made to be by the media. But yeah, there was definitely people having a few beers.
What was going on in the basement was maybe drinking a few beers, right?
I definitely know I had one or two, and I do know that there was other kids drinking as well.
Okay, so it wasn't maybe drinking a few beers. There was beers being drunk.
No, I said I drank a few beers.
Right. You said that maybe people were drinking a few beers.
No, people were drinking a few beers. There was
Definitely drinking a few beers.
definitely had a few beers, yes.
You yourself only had 1 or 2?
Yes,
You sure about that?
I'm positive.
How are you so positive about that?
Because I know I didn't drink more than that. It was my house. I already had more people show up than were supposed to be there. I was making sure that everything stayed under control.
Well, when you say everything stayed under control, you were 18 at the time?
I was.
So you were breaking the law by drinking those 1 or 2 beers, correct?
Yeah.
But you considered that to be keeping things under control?
I mean, we were dumb high school kids. I think everybody's had a few beers in high school, but I think I also had everything in control until the point where the defendant and the car full of his friends arrived at the house. This wasn't a alcohol-fueled 70 to 100 person party. This was just a big group of friends catching back up, and we were casually drinking a few beers. We weren't throwing cans around and drinking bottles of vodka and all that. We were just casually having a few drinks.
But initially, you didn't tell the cops that there had been this drinking going on there, correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, when you spoke to them that night and gave them your handwritten statement, you didn't write anything in that statement about drinking going on at the party, correct?
I do not believe so.
It wasn't something you were going to volunteer, is that fair to say?
When asked about it, I've always said that there was some drinking.
And were you drinking that night?
Yes.
And what were you drinking?
Bud Light,
How many beers did you have that?
5 to 7.
You told us that you'd had yourself 5 to 7 Bud Lights,
Yes.
and that was from the time that you arrived there around 8 o'clock until the time that you left there sometime around midnight?
Yes.
Do you think you stopped drinking earlier than when you left?
Yes.
What time do you think you stopped drinking?
Maybe 10, 30, 11.
So you think you had those 5 to 7 beers in the course of 2.5 to 3 hours?
Yes.
Was that pretty much the way folks were drinking that night?
Not everybody, but some.
Now, initially, you told the cops that there was no drinking going on at the party, correct?
Yes.
And you did that because you didn't want to get in trouble, right?
Yes.
And were you drinking that night?
I only had one beer that night.
Was anybody else drinking at Tyler Rich's house that night?
Yes.
You only had one beer that night, right?
Yes, sir.
How can you be so sure that you only had that one beer?
Because at the time I was an athlete. I had practice the next day. I was also at that specific time of my life, I was not really drinking much. I was more so the sober guy that was kind of mediating, looking after his friends. And I had the drink at Nikki's house before I even went to Tyler's.
Sal Perry, did you see him drinking that night?
I do not recall.
Michael Samperry, did you see him drinking that night?
I do not recall.
Alex Bernstein, did you see him drinking that night?
I do not recall.
Charlie Connery, did you see him drinking that night?
No, sir. I didn't see him drinking.
You recall not seeing him drink
Yes.
specifically.
Yes.
The others you can't recall. You say you specifically recall that you did not see Charlie Connery drinking, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't recall whether or not any of those other folks I've asked you about were drinking, right?
Correct.
And you told us that you'd had 2 Bud Lights in the basement, right?
Yes.
You said that Jacob Villalobos was a great friend, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you see him drinking that night?
I don't recall.
Tyler Rich, did you see him drinking that night?
I also do not recall.
What about Griffin Marcinczyk? Did you see him drinking that night?
I also have no idea. Don't recall.
You saw all these folks that night, correct?
Yes.
You just don't recall seeing any of them drink.
No, I'm not paying attention to people drinking. I could care less.
Any alcohol to drink at this high school party?
Yes, I did.
And what were you drinking?
I was drinking beer.
And how many beers would you say you had?
I had about like 2.
When you say chilling, what does that mean? The jury doesn't know. You're going to explain.
Just like hanging out, drinking a little bit, I guess, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. And there was alcohol being consumed?
Yes.
And when you got there, did you have any alcohol yourself?
Yes.
And what were you drinking?
2 Bud Lights.
And outside of the 2 Bud Lights, did you have anything else to drink that night?
No, sir.
So you had 2 at 44 Pawtucket, 2 at Tyler Rich's house.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember who gave you those 2 Bud Lights?
Nah, I was just bumming a beer off someone.
And you told us that you think you had maybe as many as 4 drinks, right?
Yes, sir.
What kind of things were you guys doing in the basement?
Hanging out. We were just having a couple drinks.
Okay,
Them
when you say
guys.
a couple drinks. What do you mean by a couple drinks?
I had a few beers that night.
You had a few beers that night?
Yes, I did.
All right. Was anybody else drinking?
Yes, they were.
But you had 2 beers?
Yeah, I would say so.
And when the car sped off down the street and you went back into the house, did you hang out inside for a little bit?
Yeah, I would say 2 minutes.
Were you guys drinking still?
No, there's no drink at this point. It was so brief between the incident that went outside.
But you said you think you had 2 beers, right?
Yeah.
Just 2?
Yes.
You sure about that?
Yes,
How can you be so sure that it was only 2?
that's what I recall.
Could it have been more?
Not that I know of, no.
And you told us that you were down there for about 10 minutes. There was no drinking going on at that point, right?
I said like 5 minutes.
You said 5 minutes
About, yeah.
that you were down in the basement?
Yeah.
5 minutes, no drinking going on?
No.
Now, were you guys drinking alcohol?
Yes, we were.
And were you drinking?
Yes, I was.
And how much were you drinking?
No more than 2 beers. I had a 12-pack of Bud Light with me.
And you said you drank 2 beers out of that Bud Light?
Yeah.
Okay. And
You were doing some drinking there while you were hanging out?
Yes.
And that was, you had no more than 2 beers, right?
No more than 2 beers.
How do you know no more than 2?
Because I know it was no more than 2 beers.
What makes you so certain about that, no more than 2?
Because it was only 2 beers.
And that was only in 30 to 40 minutes of being there that you had those 2 beers?
Yes.
Was that power drinking? Was that a fairly regular speed to have 2 beers in a 30 to 40 minute period?
That's pretty normal.
You told us you only drank 1 beer at that time, right?
Yes.
How do you know it was only 1 beer?
Because it was only 1 beer.
You recall that?
Yes.
We were all hanging out, having a good time, obviously drinking some alcohol.
And were you drinking?
I was.
How much were you drinking?
3 beers.
And when we say beers, what kind of beer?
Bush Light.
Busch Light?
And while you were there, you were drinking Busch Light, you told us.
Yes.
You had 3 beers.
3.
People were just drinking, having a good time, talking, catching up.
And when you say drinking and having a good time, what were the things that people were drinking?
Beer, alcohol.
And were you drinking that night?
I was.
How much did you have to drink?
Not that much. A few drinks.
What were you drinking?
Beer, I'd say.
So you had about 2 beers maybe?
Yeah.
Anybody else appear to be drunk there that night?
I assume most people were drinking. I wouldn't say anybody was out of the ordinary.
You said people were drinking, having a good time. There was beer and some alcohol. You didn't have that much to drink yourself.
Did not.
But you had arranged to have a ride home because you didn't want to be drinking and driving. Is that fair to say?
Correct, yeah.
And when you got to the party, were you drinking? I was. Were you drinking prior to getting to the party? Was. When you got into the car, had you already been drinking alcohol at that point in time?
I had a couple sips, the kinky.
Did you drink when you were in the car?
Yeah, a little bit.
And you said you had 2 bottles with you, and did the bottles have a specific color?
Yeah, there's one that was pink and one that was.
Were you intoxicated at this point? What were you like? You were drinking alcohol. What were you like?
I would say I have like that warm feeling in my body. I wouldn't say I was too intoxicated, but I definitely had alcohol in my system.
Did you see Austin Lifer there?
Did.
And what was he doing?
Drinking, very, very.
In fact, so intoxicated he was throwing up?
Yeah.
Had you been drinking any alcohol? I might have had a sip or 2 in the car, but not really. So if you had a sip or 2 in the car, do you recall what you were drinking? No, maybe a seltzer or something around those lines. And did you observe people drinking at the party? Yes. Do you recall what type of alcohol they were drinking? A mixture of probably vodka and beer, maybe. Do you recall if Jack or Tyler were drinking?
I think we were drunk, but I don't recall if they continued drinking at that point.
Did you drink at all when you were in the basement of Tyler Rich's house?
At the time I drove there, so I don't believe I did. It's possible I could have had one, but it would not have been any more than that.
And you told us that there was drinking going on at Tyler Rich's house, correct?
Correct.
And that you had maybe 1 beer or seltzer, right?
And what kinds of things were going on at Tyler Rich's house?
Drinking, social gathering, just hanging out with friends.
When you say drinking, what kind of things were people drinking?
Beer.
When you got back to Tyler Rich's house, did you drink anything?
I had 2 Bud Lights.